I never expected Keanu Reeves to change my life, especially not on a random Tuesday in downtown Los Angeles. I was late, irritated, and convinced the universe had me on mute. My phone was dying, my meeting was already lost, and the rain came down with that cinematic cruelty that feels personal, like a director decided today was my breaking point. The cafe was nearly empty. One barista wiping the same counter twice. One old couple arguing quietly about nothing and everything. And a man in a worn jacket, sitting alone, staring at a paper cup like it held answers. I didn't recognize him at first. That detail matters more than you think. I ordered, waited, and heard a chair scrape behind me. "You dropped this," the man said, holding my notebook. Our eyes met. That was the moment. The calm. The gravity. Keanu Reeves, standing 3 feet away, like this was the most normal thing in the world. I panicked internally. Externally, I nodded and said thanks, pretending this happened every day. He smiled, small and polite, and went back to his table. No entourage, no attention, no performance. Just him, alone with his thoughts. 5 minutes passed. 10. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows with stubborn rhythm. The old couple left. The barista disappeared into the back. It was just us and the sound of weather making decisions. He looked up again and said, "Rough day?" Something in his voice broke the dam. I sat down without asking. I told him everything. The job that felt hollow. The constant pressure to become someone impressive. The way social media made everyone else look ahead while I felt paused. The fear that I was running out of time and didn't even know what I was chasing. He listened. Actually listened. No interruptions. No phone. No glances at the door. The kind of listening that makes you hear yourself more clearly. Then he said something I still think about every morning. "You're not behind," he said. "You're just early in a story you don't understand yet." I laughed because it sounded like a movie line. He didn't laugh. He meant it, and that difference mattered. He talked about loss, quietly, without details, about how success doesn't heal grief. It just gives you better places to feel it. About choosing kindness when nobody is watching. About motorcycles, long roads, and the importance of silence. About learning to sit with pain instead of racing it until it catches you anyway. Time behaved strangely around him. An hour vanished. Maybe 2. When the barista returned and cleared her throat awkwardly, Keanu stood, paid for both of us, and shrugged when I protested. "I had good company," he said, like that explained everything. "At the door," he paused, hand on the handle. "One more thing," he added. "If you ever feel invisible, remember this. The world notices consistency more than noise." Then he stepped into the rain and disappeared into the crowd, swallowed by umbrellas and traffic and ordinary miracles. I stood there longer than necessary, replaying every sentence, convinced that if I forgot even one word the spell would break. I never saw him again. But 3 months later, I quit that job. A year later, I stopped chasing titles and started chasing skills. 2 years later, I failed publicly and survived privately. 5 years later, I understood what he meant. Meeting Keanu Reeves didn't change my life because he was famous. It changed my life because he was human. And sometimes that's the kind of hero you need. Years later, people still ask me if it really happened, if I'm sure it was him, if maybe I just projected meaning onto a stranger. I don't argue. The truth doesn't need witnesses to remain true. What stayed with me wasn't his face or his voice. It was a permission he gave me without knowing it. Permission to slow down. Permission to be unfinished. Permission to believe that quiet effort compounds in ways applause never will. On bad days, I imagine that cafe still exists outside of time, that he still sits there sometimes, offering nothing more than presence to people who think they need advice. Maybe that's his real superpower. I stopped waiting for dramatic turning points. I started building boring routines, writing when nobody cared, improving when nobody clapped, choosing kindness when it felt inconvenient. And slowly, almost invisibly, things changed. If you're reading this and hoping for a sign, this isn't it. Signs are loud. This is smaller. This is a reminder that a single conversation can reroute a life. And you don't have to meet a movie star for it to matter. You just have to be willing to sit down, listen, and stay. Sometimes I wonder who needed that conversation more, him or me. And sometimes when the rain sounds just right, I catch myself looking around cafes, half expecting the universe to test me again. It hasn't. At least, not yet. Life didn't become easier after that day. It became clearer. The difference matters. Clarity hurts at first because it removes excuses, but it also removes fear. When you stop rushing, you start noticing who you are when nobody is grading you. I stopped asking how fast I was moving and started asking whether I was moving honestly. That question changed everything. If the story sounds unfinished, that's because it is. Mine is. Yours is too. And that might be the point he was making all along. No credits rolled. No music swelled. Just another day that quietly mattered more than it looked. And maybe that's why I'm telling you this now. Because somewhere, someone is late, tired, and convinced they're invisible. And they're about to sit down, whether they notice it or not. That's where stories begin. Not with noise, but with presence and a choice to stay. Just long enough for something real to happen, even if you don't recognize it at first. Especially then. That's the part nobody tells you, until it's already passed, and you've changed, without noticing how. Quietly, like rain, on a Tuesday, downtown, Los Angeles. That's all, for now. Soon not okay. The strange thing was not that I remembered his words. It was that they started answering questions I had not asked yet. Weeks after that cafe, nothing dramatic happened. No sudden clarity. No cinematic montage. Just mornings that felt slightly less heavy and nights where my thoughts no longer chased each other in circles. I kept hearing his voice when I was about to rush something that didn't need speed. You're not behind. That sentence became a wedge, slowly prying apart belief I had carried for years. I began to notice how often I performed urgency instead of progress. How much of my anxiety came from comparing timelines with people whose lives I didn't actually want. I stopped announcing plans. I stopped waiting for motivation. I worked quietly, almost stubbornly, like someone planting trees they would never sit under. Then something unexpected happened. I started seeing him everywhere. Not Keanu Reeves, the actor. No red carpets, no billboards, but versions of that presence. A man on the bus who gave up his seat without looking around for approval. A co-worker who stayed late to fix a mistake no one would have blamed him for. A woman at a bookstore who recommended a novel and said, "It helped me survive a year I don't like to remember." It felt like the world had shifted from shouting to whispering, and I had finally tuned my ear. 2 years later, I ran into a failure so public it felt radioactive. A project collapsed. People distanced themselves. The polite silence was louder than any insult. Old me would have panicked, tried to spin it, tried to escape the narrative. Instead, I remembered another thing he said that day, almost as an afterthought. Dignity isn't how you win. It's how you lose. So I didn't disappear. I didn't dramatize. I took responsibility, cleaned up what I could, and walked away without poisoning the ground behind me. It hurt, deeply, but the pain was clean. It didn't linger the way shame does. Months later, that same failure became the reason someone trusted me with something better. That's when I understood the delayed nature of real lessons. They don't announce themselves. They wait until you're ready to recognize them. I never told anyone about the cafe. Saying it out loud felt like cheapening it, like turning something private into currency. But sometimes, late at night, I wondered what that conversation had been for him. Was he between roles? Between thoughts? Between versions of himself? Or was he simply doing what he always seemed to do, showing up fully in small moments, knowing they scale better than grand gestures? There's a myth that certain people are wise because they figured life out. I think the truth is simpler. Some people have just made peace with not figuring it out all at once. Years passed. My life became fuller, not louder. I built things slowly, lost some of them, kept others. I stopped waiting for validation and started paying attention to alignment. When something felt wrong, I didn't argue with that feeling anymore. One evening, much later, I walked past that same cafe. Different barista, different furniture. Same rain. I didn't go in. I understood then that the place was never the point. Neither was the man. The point was a moment when I finally sat still long enough to hear myself think, and chose not to run from what I heard. People still ask me what success looks like now. I tell them this. It looks like waking up without the need to impress an imaginary jury. It looks like doing good work, even when nobody knows your name. It looks like kindness that isn't strategic. And sometimes, it looks like a stranger handing you back a notebook and reminding you, without knowing it, that your story is allowed to take its time. I don't know where Keanu Reeves is right now, but I know exactly where I am. And for the first time, that's enough. Not because everything worked out, but because I stayed. And that, I think, was a lesson all along. There is a quiet cost to becoming comfortable with yourself. People don't talk about it because it doesn't photograph well. When you stop chasing urgency, some doors close without drama. Invitations slow down. Messages come later, or not at all. You realize how many relationships were powered entirely by momentum, not meaning. At first, that realization stings. Then it clarifies. I learned the difference between being missed and being needed. Around that time, I started mentoring someone younger than me. Not officially. No titles. Just conversations after work. Questions that reminded me of versions of myself I barely recognize anymore. He asked once how I stayed calm when things went wrong. I almost gave him a rehearsed answer. Instead, I told him the truth. I learned that panic is just impatience dressed as fear. He didn't fully understand. That was fine. Lessons don't need immediate adoption to be valid. They just need planting. Another year passed. Life tested me again, differently this time, not with failure, but with opportunity. A role I had once dreamed of landed in my lap, late, imperfect, and conditional. The version of me from years ago would have said yes instantly. I asked for time. That alone surprised people. I weighed the cost not in money or prestige, but in alignment. Would this pull me away from the person I had worked quietly to become? Would it require me to perform confidence instead of practicing competence? I declined, not dramatically, not self-righteously, just honestly. That night, doubt crept in. It always does. I wondered if I had mistaken comfort for growth, if I had confused peace with fear of expansion. And then, uninvited, a memory surfaced, not a sentence this time, but an image. Keanu, standing in the rain, unbothered by being unseen. That was when it clicked. He hadn't been teaching me how to slow down. He had been teaching me how to choose. Choice, I realized, is what remains when urgency is stripped away. Choice is terrifying because it leaves you without excuses. No clock to blame. No crowd to hide in. Just you and the direction you point yourself in. I started saying no more often. And when I said yes, I meant it. My work deepened. My circle narrowed. My days became quieter, but heavier in a good way, like weight you build muscle around. I stopped narrating my life in advance and let it surprise me instead. One afternoon, years later, I received an email from someone I had helped long ago. They wrote to say they had passed on a shortcut. That didn't feel right. That they remembered something I had said, though they couldn't recall when. I smiled at the symmetry. That's how it travels, I thought. Not loudly, not with attribution. Just passed hand to hand, like something fragile and useful. I still don't tell people the story unless they need it. Not because it's sacred, but because it's specific. It worked for me because I was ready to hear it. Timing is the silent co-author of every transformation. Sometimes I imagine running into him again. Not in a cafe, not in a city, maybe in another ordinary place where nobody is paying attention. I don't imagine what I'd say. Gratitude doesn't need rehearsal. But part of me hopes I wouldn't recognize him at all, because that would mean I learned the final lesson. That wisdom doesn't belong to faces or names. It belongs to moments. And moments don't announce themselves. They wait for you to stop, for you to sit down, for you to choose presence over performance. That's where the real work begins. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The last lesson didn't arrive with words. It arrived years later, on an ordinary morning that should have meant nothing. I was standing in line at a small café, not the same one, not even the same city, half awake, scrolling without interest, waiting for my turn. Ahead of me was a young man, restless, checking the time, shifting his weight like the world was already late without him. When he reached the counter, he fumbled, dropped his wallet, coins scattered. Apologies came out too fast, tangled with embarrassment. The barista smiled politely, but the line behind him sighed as one organism. I saw myself in him. Without thinking, I stepped forward, helped gather the coins, handed him one that had rolled under my shoe. Our eyes met for half a second, long enough for recognition, not of faces, but of states of mind. Rough morning, I asked. He laughed, sharp and tired. Feels like I'm always behind. The sentence landed heavier than it should have. For a moment, I considered staying silent, letting the day move on, protecting the boundary between strangers that modern life teaches us to guard. Instead, I made a choice. You're probably not. I said, you might just be early in a story you don't understand yet. He blinked, confused, curious. The line moved. The moment was already closing, but something in his shoulders relaxed, just a little. Thanks, he said. I needed something. Not sure what. I nodded. Most people do. That was it. No conversation. No coffee together. No names exchanged. He took his drink and left. I ordered mine and stepped aside, feeling something settle into place. That was when I understood. The story was never about meeting Keanu Reeves. It was about inheritance. About how meaning moves quietly through people when ego stays out of the way. About how presence is transferable. About how the most important conversations are rarely remembered verbatim, only by their effect. He had given me a sentence. Time had given it weight. And now, without planning to, I had passed it on. Not as a quote, not as advice, but as permission. Permission to slow down. Permission to be unfinished. Permission to trust that life is not a race, but a sequence. I walked out into the street, coffee warm in my hand, pace unhurried. The city moved around me the way it always had, busy, loud, convinced of its own urgency. But I wasn't. For the first time, I didn't feel like a character waiting for a turning point. I felt like someone who had already turned and kept walking. Somewhere, maybe that young man would remember the sentence. Or maybe he wouldn't. It didn't matter. That's the final lesson. The impact you make is not measured by whether you're credited for it. It's measured by whether it continues without you. The rain started again, light this time, almost polite. I smiled, stepped forward, and disappeared into the ordinary miracle of my own life. No noise, no applause, no ending that ties itself neatly. Just clarity, and a quiet certainty that the story was no longer asking me where I was going. It was asking me how honestly I would continue. And I had my answer. The end.